The morning sun bathed the French Quarter in a golden hue, casting long shadows over the cobblestone streets. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee and warm beignet drifted through the air, blending seamlessly with the distant melody of a jazz saxophone. It was a morning like any other in New Orleans. Inside Beaumont's cafe, Elise Carter moved through the motions of her daily routine, refilling coffee cups, clearing plates, forcing polite smiles. It was just another shift, just another morning, until he walked in. She didn't know, in that moment, that a simple receipt, one she had handled 1,000 times before, would change everything. But it did, and nothing would ever be the same again. Elise wiped her hands on her apron, exhaling slowly as she glanced at the old clock above the register. 8:42 a.m. She had already been on her feet for 3 hours, and yet the day felt like it had barely begun. "Elise, table 4 needs a refill," Lacey called from behind the counter, balancing a tray of croissants. "Got it," Elise replied, forcing a small smile before grabbing the coffee pot. She moved through the cafe with practiced ease, refilling mugs, clearing plates, and offering polite nods to customers. But inside, she was exhausted. Not just the kind of exhaustion that came from working back-to-back shifts, but the kind that settled deep in your bones. The kind that came from never feeling like you were getting ahead, no matter how hard you tried. "Here you go, sweetheart," came a warm voice from the kitchen. Chef Antoine, the cafe's longtime cook, placed a fresh plate of beignet on the pass. "You're running on fumes, girl. Eat something before you drop." Elise chuckled softly. "I'm fine, Antoine." He gave her a look, the kind only someone who had seen too much of life could give. "Ain't nobody fine who works as much as you do." She didn't argue, just grabbed the plate and moved back into the dining area. The bell above the door jingled as a new customer stepped in. Elise didn't look up at first, too busy setting down an order at another table. But she felt the shift, the subtle, almost imperceptible change in energy that came when someone unexpected walked into a room. And then she heard it, a hushed whisper, a chair scraping against the floor, the clink of a spoon being set down too abruptly. Curiosity tugged at her, and she turned. He was younger than she expected, taller, dressed simply, dark jeans, a fitted sweater, and a plain baseball cap pulled low over his face. But even with the understated appearance, he was unmistakable. Barron Trump. The air in the cafe changed in an instant. Elise could feel it, like a ripple moving through still water. The side glances, the quiet murmurs from a table near the window. Not hostile, not aggressive, just watchful. People were taking notice, but no one quite knew how to react. She straightened, steeling herself before walking over. Just another customer. Just another order. "Good morning," she said, keeping her voice even. "Would you like a table or a seat at the counter?" Barron glanced up, his blue eyes meeting hers for the briefest second before he gave a polite nod. "A table, please." Elise led him toward a corner booth, the farthest from the entrance. It wasn't the busiest time of day, but it was still clear that some customers were paying more attention to him than they were to their breakfasts. She handed him a menu. "Can I get you something to drink while you look over the options?" "Coffee. Black. Coming right up." She turned, making her way back to the counter, where Lacey was already leaning in. "You saw who that is, right?" "Hard to miss," Elise murmured, grabbing the coffee pot. "You think he's just passing through, or—" "Lace," Elise cut her off gently. "Let's just do our jobs, okay?" Lacey held up her hands in surrender. "Hey, I'm just saying, it's not every day the president's son walks into our cafe." Elise ignored the comment, filling a cup and walking it back to the table. She set it down carefully, feeling Barron's gaze on her as she did. "Are you visiting town? Or just stopping through?" she asked, keeping her tone light, professional. Barron lifted his coffee, taking a slow sip before answering. "Just passing through." She nodded, not pressing further. She had served celebrities before. Not often, but enough to know that some wanted attention and others just wanted to be left alone. He seemed like the latter. "Let me know if you need anything else," she said before stepping away. She kept herself busy, but she was aware, acutely aware, of the way the cafe seemed to orbit around that one booth. People pretended not to notice, but they did. They always did. 20 minutes passed, and Barron sat quietly, sipping his coffee and picking a plate of beignet. He didn't scroll on his phone. He wasn't looking around, just sitting there, lost in thought. Elise had just finished taking an order when she saw him place his check on the table. She made her way over, reaching for it. "I can take that for you." Barron nodded, pushing the receipt closer before reaching for his wallet. "Thanks. The food was great." She gave a small, polite smile. "Glad you liked it." She took the check back to the register, not thinking much of it, until she unfolded it. And then she froze. It wasn't just the amount that made her heart stop. It was the note, a tip that made her breath catch in her throat. A message written in neat, precise handwriting. "For your kindness. Brighter days are ahead." Her fingers tightened around the slip of paper as her vision blurred for just a moment. "Elise." Lacey's voice snapped her out of it. "Everything okay?" She swallowed hard, blinking quickly before shaking her head slightly. "Yeah, I just—" Her eyes flickered back toward the booth, but Barron was already standing, already making his way toward the door. She wanted to say something, call out, thank him, but no words came. He stepped outside, the door closing softly behind him. The cafe was still buzzing, customers lost in their own conversations, completely unaware that Elise's world had just shifted, just slightly, but enough. She stared down at the receipt again, the inked letters standing out against the crisp white paper. Brighter days are ahead. For the first time in a long time, she let herself believe it. The cafe was still buzzing, but Elise felt like the world around her had slowed to a crawl. The receipt in her pocket felt heavier than it should have, like it was carrying something more than just ink and paper. She pressed her fingers against it, as if she could somehow absorb the meaning behind the words scrawled across it. "For your kindness. Brighter days are ahead." Her pulse thrummed in her ears, drowning out the normal sounds of the morning rush. Lacey was still gaping at her like she'd just won the lottery, and Antoine, ever the observer, stood quietly behind the counter, his arms crossed over his broad chest. "Elise," Lacey whispered, her voice an urgent hiss. "This is huge. What are you going to do?" Elise swallowed hard, trying to find her voice. I don't know." Lacey let out a breath, shaking her head. "You don't know? Girl, you just got a $10,000 tip from Barron Trump. You realize what that means?" Elise did realize it. That was the problem. She glanced around the cafe, suddenly hyper-aware of the fact that other people might have seen the tip too. A few customers had been sneaking glances ever since Barron had walked in, and now it felt like their curiosity had sharpened. Antoine stepped forward, his deep voice cutting through the rising tension. "Take a deep breath, kid." Elise did. It didn't help. "You don't have to decide anything right now," he continued. "Ain't nobody saying you gotta go posting about it or telling the whole damn city. But you do gotta be ready for what's coming." Elise frowned. "What do you mean?" Antoine's expression was unreadable. "You think something like this stays quiet?" Elise hadn't thought about that. Not really. But the moment he said it, she realized how naive it had been to assume that this could stay just between her, Barron, and the receipt in her pocket. Lacey let out a sharp exhale, rubbing her hands together like she was already imagining the chaos. "Oh man, this is so gonna blow up." Elise shot her a look. Not helping. Lacey held up her hands in surrender. "I'm just saying, it's not like people are not going to talk about it." And she was right. Because as soon as Elise turned back toward the counter, she saw it. A man near the window had his phone out, the screen tilted just enough that she could see what he was doing. He was typing something and taking a picture. Her stomach dropped. "Damn it," she muttered under her breath. Lacey followed her gaze and sucked in a sharp breath. Oh no, Elise didn't wait. She moved, fast, toward the table, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Excuse me, sir." The man looked up, blinking as if he hadn't expected to be caught. Elise forced a smile, even though she felt like she was on the verge of panic. "I'd really appreciate it if you didn't post whatever you just took a picture of." The man hesitated, but then he shrugged, like it wasn't a big deal. "I was just posting about it." Elise finished for him. He hesitated again, but then sighed, putting his phone down. "Look, it's already out there. Someone else was talking about it on Twitter. I just—" Elise didn't hear the rest. Because the damage was done. Lacey's phone buzzed on the counter, and when she picked it up, her face went pale. Elise. Elise turned slowly. What? Lacey swallowed hard and turned the screen toward her. It was there. Already. A tweet. A picture of Barron Trump's receipt. And the caption, Barron Trump just tipped his waitress $10K. Read the note. Wow. Elise's breath caught. It had begun. She felt Antoine's presence behind her before she even turned around. His voice was steady calm. You want to take a break, kid? She should. She needed to breathe. But she shook her head. No. I should just finish my shift. Antoine studied her for a long moment before nodding. All right, but be ready. Elise wasn't sure she could ever be ready for something like this. The shift dragged on, but the world outside the cafe was moving fast. By the time Elise was clocking out, her phone had vibrated at least 100 times in her pocket. When she finally pulled it out, she felt the air leave her lungs. Notifications. Dozens of them. She wasn't even famous, and yet, somehow, she was trending. Hashtag brighter days. Hashtag Barron Trump. Hashtag waitress tip. She clicked on one of the tweets, her hands shaking. The original post had already gained 50,000 likes. And it wasn't just that tweet. News outlets were picking it up. People were debating it. Some thought it was inspiring. Others were twisting the story into something it wasn't. PR stunt. Rich kid looking for attention. The waitress should donate it instead of keeping it. Elise felt sick. She had done nothing. She hadn't asked for this. Her phone buzzed again. A new text. It was from an unknown number. Elise, this is Laura Hayes from the Times-Picayune. Would love to chat with you about the Barron Trump tip story. Let me know when you're available. Elise's fingers tightened around the phone. Lacey had been right. This was not going away. She could feel the weight of it pressing down on her chest. She didn't want to be the center of a viral moment. She didn't want people arguing over something that had meant so much to her. Another text came through. This time, it was from her mom. I saw the news, sweetheart. Call me when you can. Proud of you. Red heart. Elise squeezed her eyes shut, exhaling slowly. She had a choice to make. She could ignore it, let the internet take over the story and shape it into whatever they wanted it to be. Or she could say something, not for clout, not for attention, but because this moment, this act of kindness, deserved to be remembered for what it really was. Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she started typing. The cafe was quieter than usual, but Elise knew better than to think it was actually quiet. The silence wasn't the comforting kind. It was the heavy, suffocating kind, like the moment before a storm hit. She could feel it pressing in, coiling in the spaces between the clinking of coffee cups and the murmured conversations of customers who were pretending not to stare at her. She hadn't even sat down for the interview yet, and already she could tell the world was waiting. Lacey slid a cup of coffee in front of her, her expression hesitant. You sure about this? Elise stared at the steam curling from the surface of the dark liquid. She wasn't. Not really. But backing out now wasn't an option. She nodded anyway. Yeah. Lacey hesitated. People are going to talk, you know. They already are. Elise let out a slow breath, gripping the cup between her hands. Might as well make sure they're talking about the right thing. Lacey didn't argue. She just gave a small nod before turning back toward the counter, leaving Elise alone with her thoughts. The door chimed. Elise looked up just as Laura Hayes stepped inside. The journalist carried herself with an effortless kind of confidence, dressed sharply in a fitted blazer, her notepad tucked neatly under one arm. But despite her professional appearance, there was something gentle in her eyes, something that made Elise feel like maybe, just maybe, this wouldn't be as bad as she'd feared. Laura spotted her and made her way over. Elise. Elise straightened. Yeah. Laura smiled, sliding into the seat across from her. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk. Elise swallowed, nodding. I want to make sure the story is told right. Laura set her notepad on the table, clicking her pen. That's exactly why I'm here. Elise exhaled slowly, then forced herself to meet the journalist's gaze. Okay. Laura studied her for a moment before speaking. So, let's start from the beginning. Tell me about that morning. What was it like before everything happened? Elise thought back to the moment before Barron Trump had walked in. The exhaustion, The feeling of moving through the motions, like every day, was just another copy of the last. She gave a small, wry smile. Honestly, it was just another shift. Laura raised an eyebrow. Nothing unusual. Elise shook her head. Not at first. I was just working, tired, thinking about how I'd probably be stuck covering for someone else's shift that night. I wasn't expecting anything special. Laura tapped her pen against her notepad. And then he walked in. Elise let out a breath. Yeah. What was your first thought? Elise hesitated. That he looked normal. Laura's lips quirked up slightly. Not what people expect. Elise shook her head. Not all. He wasn't loud. He wasn't demanding. He just walked in, sat down, and kept to himself. If it weren't for the way everyone else reacted, I don't think I would have even realized who he was at first. Laura jotted something down. And how did people react? Elise gave a humorless laugh, like they didn't know whether to stare or pretend he wasn't there. Laura tilted her head. But you? I just treated him like any other customer. Elise shrugged. Because that's what he was to me. Laura studied her for a beat. And when he left the tip, Elise's fingers tightened slightly around her coffee cup. It wasn't just about the money. Laura leaned in slightly. What do you mean? Elise exhaled slowly, then pulled the receipt from her pocket, smoothing it out on the table. She traced the words again with her fingertip. For your kindness. Brighter days are ahead. She swallowed hard. I don't think I've ever had a stranger look at me and see me. Not like that. Laura was quiet for a moment, then nodded. That's a powerful thing. Elise let out a soft breath. Yeah. Laura tapped her pen lightly against the notepad. You know, a lot of people are saying you should donate the money. Elise smiled faintly. Yeah, I've seen that. Laura tilted her head. What do you think? Elise didn't answer right away. She thought about her mom, about the hospital bills that never stopped coming, about the rent that always felt too high. Finally, she said, I think people assume they know my life without knowing anything about me. Laura studied her carefully. So you're keeping it? Elise met her gaze. I'm using it. Laura's eyebrows lifted slightly. How so? Elise took a slow breath. I talked to my manager. We're setting up a fund for service workers in New Orleans, bartenders, waiters, people who live off tips. Because I know what it's like to struggle. And if this money can help me, it can help others too. Laura's lips curved into a small smile. That's a hell of a story. Elise exhaled, her chest feeling lighter than it had in days. Yeah, she said softly. It is. Laura's pen hovered over the notepad for a moment before she spoke again. You realize this is going to make waves, right? Not just the tip, the way you're handling this. Elise let out a slow breath, gripping her coffee cup a little tighter. I'm not trying to make waves. I don't want this to turn into something it's not. Laura studied her, tapping her pen lightly against the table. And what is it to you? Elise glanced down at the receipt again, her fingers tracing the words out of habit. A reminder, she said softly. Laura waited. Elise exhaled, then met the journalist's gaze. That even when life feels impossible, there are still people out there who see you, who care, who choose kindness when they don't have to. Laura nodded, jotting something down. That's a powerful message. Elise gave a small, wry smile. I hope so. Laura looked up again. You know, some people are still going to twist this. No matter what you say. Elise's chest tightened. She knew that. She had known it from the moment she decided to speak. But Antoine's words echoed in her mind. Yulem, and next thing you know, it's not even your story anymore. She straightened slightly, her grip on the coffee cup loosening. Then I'll just have to make sure they aren't the ones telling it. Laura's lips quirked up at the edges, an expression of quiet approval. I like that. Elise let out a slow breath, then glanced at the notepad. So what happens now? Laura closed it gently. Now, I write, and you get ready. Elise's stomach twisted. For what? Laura stood, slipping her notepad into her bag. For whatever comes next. The article was published that evening. It wasn't about politics. It wasn't about controversy. It was about her. The waitress who didn't ask for a spotlight. The moment of kindness that changed everything. The headline read, Waitress pays it forward after unexpected gift from Barron Trump. And underneath it, in smaller print, a story about kindness, recognition, and the power of small moments. Elise read it once. Then again, the internet was already reacting. There were still arguments, still people who wanted to turn it into something it wasn't. But there was also something else. People sharing their own stories. Stories of unexpected kindness, of strangers who had changed their lives in ways they never saw coming. And at the bottom of the article, a link. The Fund for Service Workers. Elise clicked it. It had already raised $5,000. Her chest tightened, a lump forming in her throat. This was bigger than her, bigger than a single moment. She picked up the receipt one last time, holding it between her fingers. She wasn't invisible anymore. And maybe, just maybe, brighter days really were ahead.